Alrighty, so everybody, welcome to our second day of our training class. We made it to a whopping slide number 14 because some things went slow and I rambled on a whole lot about some things. I know I need to do housekeeping things, so in our Slack you can use the Blue Team channel, or you can use the Zoom group chat to ask questions. I'll try and go back and forth in between the two of them. But if anyone wants to, jump in and give answers or ask questions, you can interrupt me and we can, do whatever. So what we ended on with last was changing group policy so it would open up potentially malicious files as a different default association, right? So we did like a .js, which is supposed to be JavaScript, and we ended up opening it with Paint. One thing that I did want to point out that I didn't point out last time is that just because those file associations aren't there doesn't mean they're not actual file associations. And if they are there, it doesn't mean that it's different from what is default. So there's going to be, hundreds of default file associations that aren't going to end up being in that file. I couldn't find why Microsoft decides to pick and choose which ones to export with ISM, but it just, I guess, picks different ones for different types of operating systems. So two things to point out for detailed alerting for those kind of potentially malicious files is that if you're not going to end up blocking or changing them or anything like that, you can actually flag on two very specific things in regards to ransomware. So .scr, so screensaver files over 22 megabytes are pretty well known to be associated with ransomware, and any JavaScript file over 15 megabytes isn't necessarily ransomware, but a lot of the ransomware that has been, over 15 JavaScript files. So you can block those or alert on those based on file size as well. So then we move on to the exploitation phase. In this part, the endpoint downloads the JavaScript file or like Microsoft Word or some other kind of document with a malicious macro. That can come from an attachment or in the email itself from a link that you get with a drive-by download with. And as we've seen more recently, a few months ago, there's actually techniques that you can spawn processes outside of an attachment using those macros. But really at that point, you just better hope you have an endpoint solution that kind of realizes that your Excel or Word document spawning a PowerShell process is probably a bad thing. Okay, and next I'm going to show you how to disable all macros with group policy. The great thing with doing it in group policy means that you can still allow admins, developers, people that need to run macros, say they're, in finance or anything like that, to run scripts themselves and just block it for the majority of users. So those, specific group of users that need to run macros and have specific use cases to run macros can have extra training. So they know that, this macro was written by this internal person and it does this function and it's always going to be named this, blah, blah, blah.xls, as opposed to them downloading a random email attachment that has a macro and running it because they have no knowledge of what the potential implications are. Another defensive mitigation you can do at that point, going back to the endpoint protection, making sure any of it's up to date and installed. A lot of people say antivirus is dead, but I still think it's still necessary. More recently, there's been a shift in behavior to endpoint solutions based on behavior or in addition to like the original signature-based antiviruses that we're used to. Not only do a lot of different compliance standards require some sort of antivirus, it's still good at stopping the stuff that's been around forever and that already have signatures in there. It's going to always capture that low-hanging fruit. You don't want to get popped by something that's been around forever just because you don't have an antivirus or something that's, you know, should be catching it. All right, so let's find my DC. Yeah, we can use this one. So this is the domain controller. I'm going to open up group policy. Maybe if it opens. Well, in the meantime. So I at one point, there it is, would have asked you in the syllabus to download some stuff, right? One of those was a link to Microsoft's website to download Office admin templates for group policy. And those are right here. So this ADMX and this admin folder are actually extra settings that you can copy onto your domain controller that give you additional functionality in group policy. So I've already done it on this server, but I'll go ahead and do it again so you can see what you do. So if you can go ahead and find your ADMX files, you can actually copy all of this. And I'll just open up another screen. This is super slow. So in C, Windows, and it's in policy definitions. And all of these ADMX files are right here. So anything that's in ADMX, when it decides to open, you can copy all of this. I mean, you can kind of ignore a lot of the language files if you want, but just go ahead and copy all of that over into the policy definitions. And that's going to overwrite a lot of what's in here. I already have these. I added these in May. So same kind of thing. You can just copy those in over top of them. And then you're also going to copy, you just want to make sure you copy that one over, that US. And it's also under policy definitions. So you want to make sure that gets overwritten, that file right there.
You just want to add the extra files. You don't want to replace it, right?
Yeah, go ahead and replace them. So after you replace all of that, a lot of them will just be in addition to. I think this EN-US is going to be just an updated one with more in it. You may have to reopen group policy, I'm not sure. If not, it'll just end up showing up in here. And this gives you more information in group policy and more settings to change in regards to Word settings, Excel settings, any Office application. So these are in C. Let's see here. Domains. We're just going to go ahead and create another one because I deleted my other ones. So we're going to create a new one. And I'm going to name it whole domain.
Can I pause for just a moment?
Yeah, go ahead.
I got lost looking for the ADMX folder that I had downloaded. What did you copy over to group policy?
So I didn't copy anything into group policy yet. When you copy them into the policy definitions directory, they're just going to magically show up in group policy.
Okay, thank you.
Group policy is going to pull from these ADMX files when it opens up. So I created this new GPO. It's linked to my entire domain. And again, like I said before, you can change this so it's linked to like everybody but a certain group. So you can have a group that's like people that are allowed to run macros, and the people in that group this wouldn't necessarily apply to. I'm not going to cover all of that in this training, but just so you know, it's possible to do that. So we're going to edit this new group policy. And I think it is in users, policies, admin templates. And if everything works right, you should have all of this stuff show up. So Access, Excel, full Office suite things, OneNote, Outlook, blah, 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 blah. So Jerry asks, is that what I do for testing, or do you use a whole separate environment? What's that pertaining to? Did I miss that question when I was going over something else? That's okay. I'll come back to that one if you want to let me know. So in these options, you can go underneath Word options, security, Trust Center, and block macros from running in Office files from the internet. So if they create their own macro, it will run, obviously, but if they get any other Office macro from anywhere else, it's going to block that from running. So you just double click on that and enable it. Oh yeah, so yeah, all the GPO stuff that you're doing in your, like we're doing now, I wouldn't recommend ever doing any of this just like off the cuff in a live environment. It would totally just break shit everywhere. Most group policy implementations aren't done great because there's not usually anybody around that knows how to plan them or enough about the environment that changing and adding new ones and stuff like that can really adversely affect login times and a barrage of different crap. So this kind of stuff definitely needs to be planned out in advance. What I had at the other place that I was at, we had like a separate OU in our Active Directory that we could move like lower priority servers back and forth to. And, different group policy would take effect when they were in a different OU. And that's how we would test a lot of the stuff. That way we didn't just turn it on and hope everything would work. Because yeah, it'll definitely break a lot of things if you just go messing around with your policy. And something like this, you can always turn it on and then slowly move people in or out of a group as well to get it to apply to them or not to apply to them. That way you can do like little test groups at one time or another. So as you can see, there's a million different things you can do by just adding those ADMX files into the domain controller. I mean, there's ADMX files that you can get for other stuff too, like other third-party applications. I think they're out there for like Adobe and Java and Firefox and that kind of stuff. So a lot of different settings that you can control this way if you want to. Let's see here. So now that we've done that, we'll go back to the wonderful slides. All right, so what can you do for potential monitoring at this phase? This little bit of code that's up here on the screen is from a program called Floss, and it's from FireA Labs. It's, oh gosh, what does it stand for? I don't have it written down and I can't remember, but Floss stands for something. It's FLOSS. And what it does is it deobfuscates strings in IR, like in an IR procedure, you would use it. But what ransomware will do sometimes is it will deobfuscate, you know, different strings so that they hide different parts of their binaries and of their command and control traffic. If you have a proxy or like a clear text, any monitoring solution, you can monitor for those obfuscation strings. You can also monitor proxy logs for unexpected file retrievals. So like if somebody connects directly to an IP address and downloads a JavaScript file, that's probably not something good that, you know, you want to happen. So that's something that you can potentially monitor at that phase. So unless any of you feel like infecting yourselves with ransomware, and I don't really feel like infecting my VMs with ransomware, we're just going to kind of gloss over the malicious action part of this, the installation step. What you need to know is that the payload's executed on the end user's device, or if you want to do it in a lab, feel free. I don't have my lab segmented off enough that I feel comfortable enough infecting myself with ransomware. One thing to keep in mind is that different variants like Lucky, Server, CryptoWall, and others will use the built-in Windows Crypto API to handle the encryption. And later on, I'll show you a little bit of what that looks like to do some monitoring on. So there's a whole bunch that you can do at this point for defensive mitigations. One is keep backups, obviously, that aren't permanently attached. That's one of the biggest defensive mitigations you can do for ransomware. And you do that so those files that have been encrypted can be restored easily. You should have, nice files, lost track of where we've gone. Oh, ZeroFox, you can copy those into, I'll give you a quick link to where they need copied to, so you can move on if you want. So they get copied there, and this is where the group policy object thing is at. So you should also have things like full DR, you know, for people that can afford it. Keep a backup plan that takes into account things like RPO, which is recovery point objective, and RTO, which is recovery time objective for different types of business critical data. Second thing you can do, so depending on the OS you have, you can use things like file system firewalls. Different endpoint solutions will do this, and they'll permit access to files on a per process basis. That means you can only open a doc with MS Word, but not Internet Explorer. That's just like an example of one of them. I know there are some endpoint solutions out there that do that too. 3, if you're a smaller shop, there's some experimental techniques out there that can be used to block crypto-based ransomware. One that I've seen is called Decryptonite, and I think it's still an active GitHub thing. There's no real enterprise-wide implementation for that kind of blocking, but it is kind of neat to kind of play around with. So Jerry says, is there any good tool to help baseline GPOs? We use a Microsoft tool. Microsoft's Advanced Group Policy Management gives you the ability to manage GPOs much more closely. So baselining current GPOs that have settings or adding new ones. I don't know about ones that are out there currently, but I do know that places like NIST have already locked down GPOs that you can download based on operating system that kind of already have a bunch of this kind of stuff already set. So you don't have to start from scratch. And you use GPO to not allow some extensions from running an app data. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What extensions, Mark? Or, I mean, you don't have to say, but just an idea, like EXEs or whatever. Yeah. And then 4, hey, you could have a portion of your IR procedure set aside to document at what point it's either to, at what point you either pay the ransomware, which obviously should always be a last resort, because, I mean, there's some ransomware out there that you can just crack because the decryption keys are out there, or, you know, you need to know if the information that it has encrypted, is it worth paying the ransomware for? You kind of have to, you know, do that balancing act, but it should always already be in that IR procedure, or maybe just wipe the drive. So not everybody has a staff for a full, you know, or full budget for a full IR investigation. So part of that procedure could include making use of an already in place third-party contract. So having a relationship with a company like that is probably a good idea, because calling them at the last minute for an incident that's like, you know, it's 6 p.m. on a Friday. When you call into a company that you don't have a relationship or a retainer with, you may end up costing yourself a whole lot more money than if you would have had that conversation when you were creating your IR playbooks. And here's that monitoring that I was talking about. This is what the high increase in Windows Crypto API looks like. And if you just see a high spike in that over a short amount of time, it could be from, you know, certain types of ransomware encrypting the file system. At that point, it's usually too late, but it's a good, it's still a good thing to have in place. So you have, you know, monitoring, alerting at every step. So now we're on to command and control, which is the 6th step. In this step, the malicious action is the ransomware contacts a command and control server on the internet and transmits the decryption key. Great defensive mitigation for this point is DNS sinkholes. So this is kind of a simple diagram showing how DNS sinkholes work. If you implement them, you can auto block outbound connections to known malicious IP addresses. Not only can you pull information from other services on what domains to block, but you can also use information from your own internal procedures to add information to those as well. So for an example, when I did work at the hospital that I was at, we had a third-party penetration tester come in and sent, you know, very, very well done phishing email. There were only 2 of us in the department that knew that this was happening, and I kind of just had to, you know, sit on my hands and watch and play dumb, you know, when everybody else was running around doing IR once they finally found out about it. But one of the first steps that we had in our playbook was to take the IP address that it had come from and add that to our DNS sinkhole. It's super simple command. It was a Linux box that we had put together on our own, and boom, the IP address that they were supposed to go to the excuse me, to the spoof site was already blocked. That way, if anybody else had the chance to go to it, it would just go to a local host address, or, you know, something that we had on that sinkhole server. Not Excel. Mostly Word. It was all of our policies and procedures and everything were in horrible, horrible Word templates. So threat lists or threat intel should never, obviously should never be blindly accepted. If anybody's ever worked on threat intel stuff, it should never be accepted, implemented, or monitored just because, right? The wealth of information that's out there on any threat topic is just staggering. But in all truth, it just comes down to how you use the information that pertain to your specific threats and your specific environment. These are threat feeds from SANS. I can copy this link in chat too. If I can find chat, there it is. And that will break down threat feeds into different levels of severity. One of those will anyways. There's that one and there's this one. I mean, Tor exit nodes could probably pretty easily just be outright blocked, but a lot of these could possibly be dual hosted. So you never want to just outright block something if it doesn't really pertain to you. You may end up, hurting a legitimate business use case that you have. But things like, known command and control servers, a lot of times those are websites that have been popped, or, just a command and control network that they have out there on, 100 Windows XP boxes. You never really know. So not alerting on those is kind of bad, but you can, depending on what solution you have, you can add that to other information that you have to make it either easier to alert on or block or whatever. Yeah, right. The list of threat actors that the government released included 12 Yahoo IPs. I've seen threat feeds include RFC 1918 addresses, which are internal only, right? So like 192.168, blah, blah, blah. It's because a lot of those threat feeds are publicly editable. So some idiot in a SOC somewhere decided, oh, this box has malware on it, but didn't realize it was, an internal box, not an external one. So you can add whatever you want, and then you just end up blocking everything on the inside of your network too. This is one thing that you can specifically alert on. This is a Wireshark packet capture, and I can guarantee you that this person was not navigating to all of these websites, right? So these are what is called a domain generation algorithm, or a DGA. What malware does is they don't want to depend on like a fixed domain or IP address, because those are just really quickly blocked, and that kind of hinders their whole point of operations. So rather than bringing out a new version of the malware or setting everything up again at a new server, the malware will switch again to a new domain at regular intervals. And that's a good example of those. There's a couple different IDS IPS solutions that have algorithms to detect and block these. It's kind of hard just guessing that that's what they're looking for, because if you don't have a human eye looking for it, it makes it a little bit more difficult to alert on those kind of things. Yeah, blocking on new domains is a good tactic too. A lot of new domains will just get purchased randomly in bulk, and you can say, oh, well, normally if you're running a real business, you will have bought your domain when you first spun up your company, before you even ever decided you wanted a website. It's not just going to be, oh, I spun up a website, I should probably have a company to go along with it. So newer domains are definitely a good thing to block. And now we're on actions and objectives. We might actually get, oh sweet, yeah, we might actually get done with ransomware for this hour. So the malicious action at the end is this screen. I'm sure if you haven't seen it on an endpoint, you've at least seen it online. This is where the malware starts encrypting files on the hard disks. It starts encrypting network drives, USB devices, and once completed, you get this little splash screen. Sometimes it's a desktop background image or a website that pops up. Sometimes there's a text file that appears with instructions to the ransom. Raise your hand if you've been popped with ransomware. I have not. I've dealt with customers that have been popped with ransomware, but I've never actually had to work on it myself. So this is a really cool thing that we're going to run. The defensive mitigation against this is honey directories. So what happens is the ransomware will go into C $, which we'll create with a PowerShell script. And we'll go into that in a minute. So what the team at Free Forensics did, and that's where I got that PowerShell script that I gave everybody, is we'll create a mount point on the root of the C volume, and we'll label that $, because when ransomware will hit that, they just start following this loop, and you'll see that in a minute. And it'll go up to, this loop will go up to 256 characters, which is the Microsoft limit in the file path name. So unlike file names, where it's kind of hard to be sure which file will be read first by the ransomware, usually directories are enumerated first and processed alphabetically, which is why files in $recycle.bin are usually encrypted first. And this will kind of serve as an early warning system. So we're going to go back to the domain controller, where hopefully I've deleted when I ran this last. Yes, I have. All right. So in our temp directory, come on. Open. There we go. All right, there's this honey directory script. We're not going to run it out of here because since all of you have a new domain controller, your execution policy for PowerShell probably isn't correct. So we're going to change that. I'm going to run Windows PowerShell. And I think it is, I think it's Git execution policy. Maybe, yeah, all right, so mine's set to unrestricted. We're gonna wanna put yours to unrestricted because more than likely it's not. So you can do set execution, policy. I think you just type unrestricted maybe. It's been a while since I've had to do this. Yeah, okay. So you can do set dash execution policy space unrestricted. It's going to want to make sure that you want to do this horrible thing. You hit yes. And mine's already set to unrestricted. Oh, probably because I'm not running this as admin. Sorry. So you have to run PowerShell as admin to do that. Sorry. Yes, yes, yes. What do you all turn on for DC to give adequate user logging? We can cover some of that. By default, the Windows domain controller is gonna capture all authentication, but we're gonna want more than that. We're gonna do PowerShell logging and command line logging and that stuff later. I don't know if that's in this one or not. This one's just going to be advanced file auditing when we do this. All right, so again, we do get execution policy, unrestricted, set execution policy. There, yeah. So that's what your screen should look like after you set your execution policy the way it's supposed to be. Remote signed. Set it however you want. I do mine restricted. This isn't going to be signed, so I doubt this PowerShell script will run if it's set to remote signed. So feel free to set it to unrestricted since it's the lab. I highly don't recommend you setting it to unrestricted on a real DC, but that's neither here nor there. So we are going to change directories into ctemp. And then we are going to run honeydirectories.ps1. Oh, and if anybody wants to remember what that looks like, it's that one. Ta-da! Look at that. So we have a $$ directory in our C drive. This is going to fool that ransomware into going into this directory first because it's just this huge recursive directory. Yeah. That doesn't really matter. It just keeps on going until it fills up the path. So right now, that isn't logging though. It's just there. It's gonna like fool the ransomware for a couple minutes and then it's gonna go on and encrypt everything anyways. So what we wanna do is we want to actually monitor for this and log on it, which hopefully will eventually go to whatever logging and monitoring solution that you have. But we are going to, yeah, definitely make your antivirus ignore this too. Let's see here. We are going to right click on this, go to properties. Was it security, advanced? There's this auditing tab. Yes, continue. So this auditing tab, we are going to add, and the principal is going to be the person or group or whatever. We're going to do everyone. So everyone's up here. That doesn't mean everyone has access to it. That just means it's going to audit everyone that does try and access it. And we want it to be on success for this folder and subfolder and files. This is fine. This is going to be default. And we hit OK. I hit apply on this screen. Okay, and OK. And what we're going to do is go back into group policy. And we'll go ahead and edit it on this whole domain policy that we had before. And this is in computer settings. Make this bigger. Windows, security. And this is advanced audit policy configuration. This is new-ish as well. I think this was 2008 R2 and above. So advanced audit policies, and then object access. And audit file system is not currently configured. And we're going to audit all successes. All right, and we're going to hope this actually shows up in the event viewer. I'm going to do force a group policy update. GP update space / force. Oh shit, you know what? I think I have to close out of this. And do that again. All right, and what we're going to want to look for in this case is going to be two different things in the event viewer. It's either going to be event ID 4656 or 4663, and it'll actually have the object name of this directory in it. Eek. Make that a little bit smaller. You know what? This going slow is not helping me click on things. There we go. So we're going to pretend we're ransomware, and we're going to go in here and look at some stuff. All right, so we were the ransomware and we went in there. So now we want to go to the Windows logs. And I'm pretty sure it's in security. Ha ha ha. Then there we go. That last one right there is 4663. And it shows the object name of that $C that me as the pretend ransomware actually went into. So other things that do this that will let you pay for it. I've heard Tripwire does the same thing. And you don't actually have to set up advanced file auditing in Windows. You can just use Tripwire to do it if you have that already. But this is free. It's already included in Windows, so it doesn't matter. And we'll go back to the slides. Is there any questions based on that? I didn't go too fast or anything. Need me to cover anything again? I tried throwing this in an IS site to trip up someone crawling brute forcing your website. I have not. I don't know if that would just be a whole lot of noise. That's a good idea, though. I think it would be interesting to turn that on and try and see what the data looks like anyways. And here's the last slide, potential monitoring for this actions on objectives. We already talked about the one thing that we could possibly look for. This is actually a screenshot kind of based on that advanced file auditing in practice. This is from Hacker Hurricane's blogspot. He also has the Windows logging cheat sheet and other kind of cheat sheets that's helpful on what logging to capture in relation to security. But you can kind of tell, where the ransomware started encrypting the file system, when that just shot up like crazy. What's what website? The one that this is on? It is that. And he's the other dude in the Slack channel. He's in there as Hacker Hurricane too. Let's see here what time we got. 10:16. So I don't want to stop now because we have another 15 minutes to go. But the next use case is up. And I feel like if we just start this and kind of stop in the middle of the beginning, we're going to be lost when we start next time. So what do you guys think? Should I keep going and we can just do a short recap next week, or do you want to stop 15 minutes early and maybe go over next time? Keep going. All right. I'll keep going. Okay, let me take a drink first though. Yes, Gatorade. No wine, that's all downstairs. All right, so we covered ransomware, right? That was the first hour and 45 minutes was covering ransomware. So next up, I thought that theft, loss, and data exfil would be a really good use case. People really seem to worry that all of their stuff's going to the cloud, or all of their stuff's being, funneled through Tor or whatever. And a lot of times that's not really what they need to worry about because they don't have anything else put into place to worry about DLP. So it's just going to be a quick overview on DLP. A lot of organizations will try and defend against this by implementing a DLP solution, so data loss protection. Even if data exfil isn't malicious, we'll kind of end up skipping the second and third steps in this use case, which is weaponization and delivery of the kill chain, because this is another one of those cases that it could be an advanced attack, but by it kind of originating from the inside of the network, the attacker kind of already has that advantage. A DLP solution would be a perfect addition to all of the defensive mitigations that we'll end up covering. First, we'll just do a little primer on DLP and some best practices prior to even implementing any kind of solution. So no DLP solution's ever going to keep your data 100% safe. Doesn't matter who's selling it to you. They think it's, the best software solution or the best implementation plan out there. Everybody's going to have a smartphone and can screenshot it with a very little chance of detection, right? Or they can send data in a chat with like Skype, Google Hangouts, all that kind of stuff. There's ways to get data out. Short of having a SCIF, I'm assuming most of you know what a SCIF is, but if you don't, it is SCIF. It stands for Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. It's basically just like a big metal box that, every bit and byte that comes in and goes out is monitored or whatever. So the focus for most DLP programs are going to be protecting against a loss of a larger amount of data, honest accidents, or specific data. These are the three areas of DLP that you need to remember when planning a solution. So the first is going to be an endpoint protection. So some things like Symantec already contain DLP options, and other solutions will come with their own endpoint clients with additional features. Second is network protection. So things like network traffic monitoring can enhance your visibility into like data in motion. So it flowing in between segments, flowing between organizations, leaving the enterprise totally. And then three, which a lot of people usually forget about, is physical. Any solution should plan for the physical copies of data as well. So printing them out, saving it to a removable hard drive or other like USB drive, or any other kind of equipment that isn't secured is, could potentially a high risk and shouldn't be forgotten. Data classification is super important. These are the 4 steps that you need to go through to identify your data. So the first is identifying the sources to be protected. Completion of that step should produce some kind of high-level description of your data sources, where it resides, if you have any existing protection measures. You need to find who the data owners and custodians are, what the type of resource is. Obtaining that kind of information can be super difficult and is usually where people kind of struggle, but it can be an added part of any kind of documentation process because data owners, custodians should be assigned and documented anyways. There are software solutions specifically created for e-discovery, and I've heard some of them work fantastically well, and those work really well for data at rest in an organization. Yeah, Forest Point. Yeah, I think that was one of the ones that I heard somebody talk about that just does a really good job on e-discovery. Second step is identifying the information classes. So you need to pick labels, and those labels should convey the protection goals that are being addressed. So classification labels like critical or sensitive have different meanings to different people in different organizations. So it's important that those high-level class descriptions and any protection associated with it are meaningful, they're well-defined, the individuals that are reading and acting on them understand those, and the ones that are classifying the information should understand those, as well as the people that are going to be protecting the data, right? So you and your superiors and anybody that's in that whole process, having those identified and documented is going to be a very important step. Step 3 is mapping protections. So you map your protections to those information classification levels that you've already come up with. Security controls are going to be at differing levels. They're going to have different methods of authentication. You're going to have air-gapped networks. There's going to be firewalls, access controls, encryptions on some of the protections and some not. Just depends on what classification level you're at as to what security control they need to have. And that's where that mapping is going to come into play. The fourth one is classifying and protecting information. So everything that you've identified in step 1 should now be classified as we talked about in step 2 and protected as we talked about in step 3. So that 4 is kind of just putting it all together. And 5 is repeating it. It should be repeated as a necessary part of a yearly audit. Data footprints are always expanding. There's new software being implemented, installed, maybe it's been upgraded so it contains more data now, or there's add-ons, or there's new interfaces that are being added, but that data has grown and changed in scope probably a lot over the course of a year. That audit of what you had as a footprint and what you have now as a footprint in the enterprise is definitely going to be a requirement to make sure that everything's documented correctly and protected correctly, as along with what you had had kind of come up with at first. You want to make sure you're still on track after that year is up. And then next is mapping the data. So you're not going to be able to protect your data if you have no idea where it is or how it moves through the organization. Knowing where the sensitive data is, how it's structured, all of that's really going to go a long way in making sure you have the right rules in place for when a DLP solution is implemented. So the three types of data, I guess, that you need to worry about is, first is data at rest. So things like data in any kind of database, any kind of file server, or in a custom application. Not only should that be identified, but also it probably should be encrypted in a secure physical location if it's important enough. And, you know, also depending on that information class that we talked about. Second is data in motion. So common avenues of data access to pay attention to, and I guess their ports, are things like FTP, SFTP, SMTP, any kind of web or API access. So all of the web ports, right? There's, you know, you can put a website on almost any port, but common are 443, 80, 80, 80, 81, 81. And yeah, Jason, you're right. Knowing where your data lives is part of asset discovery. It is. I see a lot of people skip over that as they're just thinking asset discovery are endpoints and anything with a MAC address. And they're not thinking that they should be documenting the data or how it moves. A lot of people have absolutely no idea where their data is going, if it's going to a third party. It's really crazy. Not only do they do regular asset management horribly, they have no idea where their data is or what data they even have. And the last one is data in use. So any data that can be exfiltrated using things like USB drives, CDs, or copying and pasting to external websites is data in use. So a lot of the comprehensive DLP solutions have the ability to analyze all of that data before it's transferred to removable media, like any kind of removable media. A lot of them will automatically encrypt that sensitive information, and it will prevent data from being faxed, copied, copied into memory, pasted into other documents, stuff like that. You sound like a force point rep. Oh, it does OCR. That's great. Yeah, that's another thing. So yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how many places that I've been able to just copy something, you know, with Control C or Command C and just paste it somewhere else. It's a crappy way to do data exfil. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible. There are solutions out there that'll handle it, but that is something that you have to kind of keep in mind. And we can cover this last one before I finish. So any kind of DLP deployment should definitely thoroughly be tested in like a small controlled implementation before doing it to the larger enterprise. You know, begin with simple rules that just monitor stuff. I kind of look at it like implementing a new firewall. You know, you run those rules in monitor mode. It lets you observe what's going to end up being allowed, blocked, alerted on. Kind of gives you a tuning period. In that tuning period, you'll be able to modify your strategy, fine tune those rules, and then it's going to be a smoother rollout when it goes to a larger scale. You can't just assume that the initial rollout is going to be working and will continue to work. Just like you're going to repeat all that data classification, you're going to want to also do a reassessment, testing of those controls, making sure you can't do what you think you can't do. You know, if a piece of software changes and, you know, one of your rules stops working, you want to make sure you're catching that by spot checking or reassessing. And just like the majority of any other security implementation that we've ever done, it's not going to be a one-time project, but it's kind of a process that will continue to grow, and it's going to be shaped by the kind of data that your organization holds. So that's another thing that you can add to like a regular penetration test. So that, you know, that goal for the pen tester could be a section where that DLP is tested from like an offensive viewpoint of them actually trying to exfil, you know, whatever your important data is. Okay, so I've talked for an hour. Next week we will be on to the actual beginning of the recon of DLP. Oh, not DLP, but like theft, loss, and exfil. And we can start there next week. So that being said, now that I've talked and rambled for an hour, does anybody have any questions? Or you want to pipe up and tell me I was wrong anywhere? Sift. Thank you, Dan. I do not know what SIFT is. Is that a DLP thing?
Dance.
Yes, DLP protect everything. Oh, you know what? I have seen this. I didn't know it had anything to do with DLP though. Yeah, I'd like to see like a offensive, defensive DLP. Like that would be a cool CTF to do like a DLP thing. Yeah, thank you, everybody. And if you have any other questions or want to talk about anything, we can just head to the Slack channel and then I can turn off recording. But yeah, thank you, everybody.